Hello, hi, I'm Carmen, and today I'll be presenting Overcoming Imposter Syndrome. And this will be my workshop. It'll be around 30 minutes. And now let's get started. Once again, I'm Carmen, I'm a cmd-f coordinator, and I'll be leading this workshop. So first, I'd like to acknowledge that nwPlus is based on the UBC Point Grey, Vancouver campus, which sits on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Musqueam First Nation. So a little bit about me. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Carmen. I'm a cmd-f coordinator, which is our hackathon happening in March 2022. Hope to see some of you there. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a fifth year in psychology, and I'm also a computer science TA for CompSci 100, as well as I was actually a HackCamp coordinator last year, so this hackathon is quite special. To get started, it'd be great to know how is everyone feeling so far. If you could put in the chat how you're feeling from 1 to 10, 10 being you're feeling amazing, 1 is that, you're a little bit tired and everything. Feel free to put it in the activity banner. It'll be under team formation / calm thinking. So if you can't find it, it'll be under team formation, and hopefully I can see some of your responses. For me, I'm feeling like around like an 8. I'm a little bit sleepy, but I'm really excited to be here. So I'll let the chat put in how everyone's feeling, and I'll move on to the next slide. So here are our lovely TAs. We'll have JP, he's our treasurer. His pronouns are he, him. And we'll have Victoria, which is another cmd-f coordinator, and her pronouns are she, her. They'll be in the chat if you have any questions, and I'll be able to monitor the chat too if you have any questions towards me. So here's our timeline. It'll take around 25 minutes. We'll start off with an introduction. What is imposter syndrome? How to combat imposter syndrome? Diversity in tech, resources, questions, sharing experiences. And now let's get started with the introduction. So what is imposter syndrome? Imposter syndrome can be categorized as many different things, and here are just some definitions that some people have given. Feelings that we haven't earned our accomplishments, or that our ideas and skills aren't worthy of others' attention. This is from TEDx, as you have heard their TED Talks. It is also not a disease or abnormality, and necessarily not tied to depression, anxiety, or self-esteem. So you can have really, really high self-esteem, but also still have imposter syndrome. It is the belief that one's success is not deserved or hasn't been achieved as a result of one's own efforts or skilled. Oxford Languages, kind of the thing where it's like you got your position or you got to the university or you won a prize based on kind of like other factors like luck and not necessarily your hard work and effort. It can also be psychological patterns in which an individual doubts their skills, talents, and or accomplishments and has an internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. As many of you may have played Among Us, that happened during quarantine. It kind of is a thing where you feel like you're an imposter, like you don't belong. Not necessarily that you're out to get anyone, but you just feel like you don't necessarily belong, and people are just trying to find the imposter. So, who is affected by imposter syndrome? So, here are some names that you may know, as you may have learned in your physics class or just any science class. Are Albert Einstein and all his accomplishments, as well as some famous writers, the first female poet in the US presidential history. Another thing to consider is that it does disproportionately affect underrepresented or disadvantaged people and minorities such as women and gender minority, ethnic and racial minorities, people with different sexual orientations, as well as people with disabilities. So while imposter syndrome can affect everyone, it is good to consider the reasons why other groups of people are affected more by imposter syndrome. So here are some theories behind imposter syndrome. What causes imposter syndrome? One thing is that people that are highly accomplished tend to think that others are just as skilled. So if you're in a CS class, you might think that everyone finds the material as easy as you do, or maybe as hard as you do, because you believe that others are just as skilled. there's a socialization where from a very young age you're kind of taught certain ideas where, like, for example, the stereotype that, like, girls are belong in the kitchen or they're very nurturing, as well as they should be like a mother figure and be in the household. While boys, they can go outside and play with trucks, and they can play with Legos, and they can also play with kind of like the idea that they belong in tech. And from these ideas of socialization, these can kind of affect you as well as kind of your mentality for things like computer science and whether you belong or not. That leads me to my second point, feelings of belonging, the stereotype of tech. You may have a certain idea or person that belongs in tech, and you might not necessarily fit that ideal, whether that is being majority white or male, or um, heterosexual males that can be seen as the majority of tech. And depending on your own identity, you may not necessarily identify with any of them. I feel like you aren't or not belong in tech. There's microaggressions, as you might have learned, like, oh, like they don't believe that you got into tech, or they're like, we've never had anyone who looks like you in our field or in our company. And with this, a lack of representation, because if you've never seen someone like you in the tech field, then you might feel like you would be the first, and that might be very daunting. As many or as some of you may know, there is a over enrollment pressure. So spots in CS in Canadian universities and US universities tend to be quite competitive, and it can be hard to consider yourself into CS if you feel like you're not that interested, or you feel like too many people are driven, and you feel like, oh, like it'd be too hard to get in and even try for going into CS or a tech related degree. There is your own biases depending on the people you grew up with, as well as the things you've been taught, whether you believe that people in tech look like you, or if you've ever been encouraged to go into tech. So here are some 5 forms of imposter syndrome. I'll give you a chance to read over it. Some free ASMR. So I'll just go on with the first one, perfectionism. So if you've ever been or if you've ever felt like this, it's kind of like the perfectionism where you're like, you can't let anything go. You want everything to be as perfect as possible. You do have an extra level of consciousness, and you want to go over each and every detail. While this is really good to be detail oriented, it does make you feel like you're constantly under pressure. You feel anxious and you struggle with completing the last mile. So it could be in the beginning where you've been able to do everything very well and you're like everything is going well, but then something externally happens and you can't necessarily control it, and things don't go as well as what you planned or what the outcome you want to do. It could be like funding, it could be time, your own personal health, whether it be physical, mental, or emotional. So that is one form of perfectionism where you feel like you're an imposter because you're not able to make things perfect, as well as you feel like kind of inadequate because things aren't perfect. There's another form of imposter syndrome where it's expert. You kind of fear that you're going to be exposed as inexperienced or unknowledgeable. So it could be kind of the thing where you're starting a new CS class, it's a 100 level, and then you find out so many people already know how to code beforehand, and you want to see like, oh, like, do I belong in here even though I don't have any coding experience? And it can be true that people don't have coding experience, but it does feel like the majority of people do know how to code. So you want to work hard, you want to over prepare and absorb as much as you can. But this also leads to high expectations of yourself and feeling that you should have a certain amount of knowledge already, or that you haven't necessarily met the expectations of others. So another form, the third form is superhero. You're very highly motivated and compelled to prove themselves to be not adequate by taking a large workload. Maybe you've seen that in your classmates, your friends, or maybe that's even you. So they want to do this so they can show that they succeed. They want to showcase their accomplishments as well as their results. However, sometimes, as you may have known, the outcomes might not necessarily be what you want it to be. It fails your expectation. What can this lead to is that it can lead to internalizing your failure and blaming themselves. The fourth one is a natural genius, which values talent or abilities as the most important thing instead of measuring success by work or effort. Maybe you feel like you've been born with this, like you've been born with a certain amount of talent, a certain amount of knowledge, and you feel like you can't grow from there. You want to push hard in the beginning, but then afterwards you feel like not compelled to finish the project, or you feel like you don't want to find out the end result because it's not necessarily what you want to do, or what the result is not what you want. So the last one is soloist. It's like the Dark Knight. They kind of do everything themselves, hence the word solo. They want to accomplish tasks on their own, and they kind of reject other people's help. Maybe you've been wronged in a group project, and now you can never trust other people because you're like, they won't complete the work. So it's much, much easier to do it on yourselves. But it is kind of hard because once you get to a certain point, at the end of the day, you're like, I can't do this. They would tend to walk away instead of asking for help. I'll just check the chat really quickly on this, or I guess on this side, since it's mirrored, and see if there's any questions that popped up. So we see someone's a solid 4, understandable. Days have been tough considering the organizing team has worked really, really hard to make this hackathon happen. Midterms, time to relax, taking time for themselves. We have cat emojis. They're very, very cute if you want to express your feelings. Yeah, hopefully our stretching session earlier helped you get out of your seats. I know it's really easy to sit at your computer for hours on end. And now let's go on to the rest of the presentation. So, how to combat imposter syndrome. So, here are some things that you can do to combat imposter syndromes. If you have mentors, by talking to your mentors, you realize that other people experience the same thing that you do. You realize that they have gone through feeling like an imposter too. And then you can see how they kind of combat it and how they've kind of recognized their own expertise and their own experience in terms of imposter syndrome. It's good to recognize that you have put in the effort and the hard work in order to learn more about your field of study, and that you have some knowledge and you can offer some advice. Remembering that you can do well and that you are capable is important because it allows you to kind of realize the mindset is that you are able to do this. Realizing no one is perfect, very cliche, but I think it's good to acknowledge that even the people that you look for up to, they have their own things that they're dealing with, as well as everyone has unique struggles. By changing your thinking and kind of the mindset where you rather than like, oh, I like have to get 100% on this exam, by thinking more like you just want this exam to test your knowledge and you want to see how much you've learned, can kind of change your thinking and take off the pressure of feeling like, oh, like I have to do so well. Or maybe with finals coming out, you're kind of like calculate all your grades and you're like, I need at least like a 95 to get like an A in this course. And that can be quite harsh because it feels like you have to reach a certain threshold rather than thinking, I'll just try my best for the final. Hopefully, you can still pass, even if you don't do too well on your final. So, just kind of changing your mentality and your thinking. If needed, if you feel like your imposter syndrome is quite strong, you can always talk to someone who can help you out, as well as get professionals help. Collecting and revisiting positive feedback. As human beings, we are literally wired and we have evolved to look at danger, and we tend to focus and kind of like really, really think over and over and over about our negative thoughts, because in the past that's what we have done in order to stay alive. But now, kind of in 2021, that necessarily is a skill that we would want to have, but it doesn't mean that you need to always think of the negative things. And it's good to kind of think of the positive feedback, whether it's from your mentors, your professors, even your friends. If your friends tell you you're a good friend, then that's also important. And also kind of realizing that your identity isn't just a student or like a worker. Like, even if you don't do well on your exam, for example, sure, you might have done a little bit poorly as a student, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad friend or a bad child to your parent, or even like a bad like pet owner. So it's good to acknowledge that you may mess up in one area, but it doesn't define you as a person. And it has some more tea. Just checking the chat. So here are some statistics and data. So the women's percentage of CIS bachelor degrees. So it's just kind of like in tech. As you can see, it's like gradually, it's mirrored. So it's like trying to figure out the right direction. It's like gradually going. This it should be going up. So as you can tell, things are getting a little bit better, where more and more women are getting enrolled in CS degrees as well as tech degrees. And this is just data from like 2020. So hopefully in 2022, when they do another update, you can see that it's gradually increasing and increasing. As you can tell, 17,786 women have earned the degree in 2019. So it is an increase, as well as you can see it's gradually going up. So I guess another thing to consider is, why is diversity important in tech? So why is it important that you have a role in tech or that I have a role in tech? So as you can tell, most of technology isn't necessarily built with everyone in mind. It could be that your phone screen isn't very compatible with maybe your grandparents' like eyes, and it's like hard for them to see, or even like how like Apple has removed the touch button. It's like a little bit hard for people maybe to like realize that there's no physical button. With that, it's harder to navigate between things and everything. And it's also like even like the little things, like if you have like a waffle maker and your waffle maker is like upright, the batter won't cook properly. So it's like, oh, but if you had more people that made waffles or who kind of understood their own techniques as like home bakers, and maybe that poor design wouldn't have happened. It's also a quote where it's like, when a team doesn't reflect its complete consumer base, it makes mistakes. If everyone in the room has the same background, experiences, and worldview. So as you can tell, like if the same people are making the same technology, or even like your hand size, like my hand size is pretty small. And like I have an iPhone and they just keep getting bigger. So I'm like, it's very hard to type with one hand. So it's even like the little things, or like they don't fit in anyone's pocket anymore. So it's like they don't even fit into any like bags either. So it's just like the little things where you're like, the sizing of things can make it hard in like a daily life, especially since technology is everywhere. There is hope. So sharing experiences is one of the ways you can combat imposter syndrome, by talking about it. Everyone's susceptible to a phenomenon known as pluralistic ignorance, where we all each doubt ourselves privately, but believe we're alone in thinking that way. So I'll talk about my own personal journey, and I encourage anyone interested to do so in the chat. So the activity planter, it's under team formations, comp thinking. If you want to share your own experience of imposter syndrome, I'd love to hear it. I'd love to read it. And I'm also going to think a little bit more about my own experience, and then I'll share. But yeah, if anyone has experiences with imposter syndrome and they're willing to share, that'd be great, because I'd love to know more. Okay, I'll go with my own experience while people are thinking of their own experiences. So, I guess like from my experience, one of the things is that when I was applying to universities way back when, I feel like I've never considered CS because I never really saw myself into it. While I did find that coding was interesting, I felt like there's so many different factors where I didn't know that many people in CS, or I felt that CS was quite competitive. Even if you go to a university like UBC, where you don't actually go into the CS program directly, you have to kind of like wait your first year, and then depending on your GPA and how many spots are open that year, then you get in. That would be pretty tough. I felt like just like other things like the kind of the lack of representation. I had my own biases where I was like, I didn't think I was good enough for CS, or my background is in arts, and I really enjoy arts. I and afterwards, after joining this club for hackathons and nwPlus, I did try out some CS classes. Thankfully, or like unthankfully, they are like not for me. But what I appreciate really about the experience is that I kind of like tried it out, and I gave myself the chance to try CS, even though it was like a hard thing to consider. The classes are very intimidating. If you see all over like social media, there are a lot of people that do very well in first year CS, at least at UBC, but quite a few people don't do that well. And I was like, oh, don't know how I want to feel about that. We have someone in the chat, one of our lovely TAs, Victoria, mentioned her experience, and now I'll read it out loud. Yeah, so Victoria is talking about feeling imposter syndrome going into Comp Sci 110 at UBC. So, for those that don't go to UBC, this is our kind of introduction into CS. It can be quite intimidating because a lot of people that take the class, especially even in their first year, they've had prior coding experience. So, it feels like you're already behind, even though you just started. I'll insert I won't insert the meme, but it's like the meme where it's like after the first day of university or even high school, you're like automatically behind, even though it's only been 1 day, and that can be really tough. So yeah, it can be quite tough, but it is important to kind of like understand that people have gone through it. Even the people that did do well in Comp Sci 110 might not necessarily have done well on Comp Sci 121, which is like the next level. And there is a lot of aspects to computer science. There's like software and hardware, and there's different specializations that you can take. I think someone's trying to type in the chat, so I'll just wait for them to finish and then I'll share their experience too. We're almost at the end, so hang in tight. Oh, okay, cool. So thank you for your response. I'll just read it out loud. I always thought programming and tech stuff was really cool, but after taking an intro to Java course in high school and having a bad experience with a teacher, I was put off by the whole thing. Definitely, that's true, especially in university and high school. The teacher can kind of make or break the class, whether they support you and encourage you to continue your studies, or they kind of just don't aren't necessarily that interested in teaching, and that can kind of like ruin the experience for you. Personally, my experience with imposter syndrome, not CS related, was after I got into university. I felt like I got in as a fluke because it felt like everyone else in my classes were so much smarter than me. Yeah, I think that's true. If you went to a small high school, it does feel like there's so many different people, and it doesn't feel like necessarily you're a person with so many different people. But it's good to consider that even if you don't know too many people in the class, I'm sure someone in the class remembers if you sit in the same class in the same seat every single time, or if you wore like a cool hat, they're like, I remember that person. So it's good to remember that you are a person, and university can be tough with making friends and everything. And yeah, it does feel like everyone's smarter than you, but the university, like if you feel like the university was good in terms of like you feel like they have a good kind of rubric for finding people, then you made it through the rubric. So it's good to understand that the university did want you, and there was a reason for it, even if you don't see it yourself. So thanks for everyone sharing, and then I'll finish up the presentation. So here's a quote from Farah Strong. the editor of UK Elite. I think I'm saying it wrong. I don't necessarily read this magazine, which is okay, but she's also the author of Discomfort Zone. Imposter syndrome is a gift rather than an excuse for holding us back. It is an intentional control valve that alerts us when we are in our discomfort zone. And that is critical because this is the zone where accelerated growth happens. Feeling fraudulent is a sign that you are being challenged. And when we're challenged, that's when we'll make true breakthroughs. So as you can tell, I hope this is kind of like a different mindset in thinking of imposter syndrome rather than a bad thing. You can think of it as a good thing. So here's the end with a quote that I mentioned earlier by the same TEDx people. Please remember that you have talent, you're capable, and you belong. Thank you for listening, and let me know if you have any questions in the chat. It is stamp time, so hopefully the Discord bot happens and then everyone can get their stamps. Oh, it's pronounced L. Yeah, that makes sense. I was like the too many L's. It's a word compressed of just E and L. Yes. So Sam time, thank you for having me and have a great rest of learning.